deep dives and late recoveries on Wall Street. We'll have that story. And tonight, what works? Emotional first aid. Keith Morrison with a story of community volunteers trained to help people overcome shock and grief from big tragedy. Our daily difference tonight, what works? Emotional first aid we're talking about tonight. What happens to those who are witnesses to a tragedy, a crime, or an accident? They, too, it turns out, are victims, and they are too often the forgotten victims. Well, now there's help. It's what works in Carlsbad, California. NBC's Keith Morrison.
Look at the faces outside the Luby's cafeteria in Texas. Faces that have just witnessed the horror of a mass killing. These days, we call these people co-victims, and we know they have things in common. They suffer terribly, and almost always they suffer alone. Carlsbad, California. The car has hit a pedestrian, a teenager. The police, the ambulance have come and gone. The victim will be all right. The driver is an emotional wreck.
I've been afraid it's been happening for 2 days.
But this time, through the confusion and the dark and the jangled nerves, comes this woman with a shoulder to lean on and calm advice.
I'm sorry, I got with the doctor. I should have waited 6 more hours and see how you feel, because you might be bruised.
Emergency personnel couldn't deal with some people on emergency scenes, and those people are what we call co-victims, people who've been emotionally traumatized.
Rhonda Grace.
So in Carlsbad, they are graduating volunteer angels. What do? They fill the gap and share the pain after the ambulance is gone. And they do it for free.
I like to refer to our program as a modern-day Good Samaritan program.
You have those rosemary
TIP, the Trauma Intervention Program, is why housewife Suzanne Teal willingly embraces disasters, becomes a servant of the families of suicides, of parents confronted by the death of a child, of anybody traumatized by the worst of life.
I'm there to help them get control back of their life however best they can.
Even though what they find on call, day or night, and on a moment's notice is often horrific.
It's kind of like they're in a pit. And instead of me reaching my hand in and pulling them out of the pit, I jumped in the pit with them and showed them how to get out.
So why didn't anybody think of this before? Why, indeed, said the Ford Foundation, which rewarded a simple good idea with a $100,000 grant, which TIP will use to go nationwide.
Every community in this country has the main ingredients for this sort of program.
We heard shots being fired.
There's been a gang shooting at a local high school. Volunteer Barbara Mirola is there in 20 minutes.
I've got my other volunteers coming in.
And listens and talks and mostly is just there for the injured victim's brother, who is wrestling with an urge for revenge.
Well, it's a tough situation you're in, you know? Oh, yeah.
There's nothing we can do to keep these horrible, terrible things from happening. But I think if we can do any little thing that will help a person in this horrible, terrible situation, it's worth it.
In America, it turns out, there are a lot of good Samaritans, and lots for them to do. And now a way to do it. Keith Morrison, NBC News, Carlsbad, California.
Sometimes